They are not written this time in that they are not typed out, but they are written on my notes. So, Part A observation. I'm specifically going to be talking about the small group individualized math instruction and the encouraging students to take action. Both of those had my attention for a number of reasons. As for describing the students' behavior, I noticed that a lot of the times the students, when they were interacting with the instructor, they were alert. Their body language, their body language indicated that they were focusing on her as well. Shoulders, I think it's squared, but I could be wrong. Um, I noticed that while the other students were also occupied with group activities, they seemed engaged in the material and with each other. Um, Other things I noticed when it came to student behavior, encouraging for students to take action. I noticed that in every single group activity, they were facilitating a lot of very insightful discussions. They were engaged, they were talking on multiple levels. And while there were times where students disagreed, there was never any outright arguments. They seemed to have a very good grasp of respecting each other's opinions, which is always a good rule or good guideline to have. Um, and as for were the students grasping what they were taught observation wise, I would like to say yes, and let me elaborate on that. When it came to small group and individualized math instruction, with the first girl, when she was interacting with the instructor using the popsicle sticks, she seemed to be able to answer them very quickly, and if she did need a little time, she still seemed to be having a good grasp. And I actually really thought that was interesting, because then when the next two boys came up, there was a different level of learning, and the interaction between the two was it was entirely focused on the subject and the instructor and the lesson she was trying to teach. Um, from everything from them literally counting out the pieces of the pie to them both giving their all to answer even when their answers were incorrect. This is a tangent when it comes to it, part B interpreting in it. I noticed that even when the students both gave answers, she did not immediately tell them no. Instead, she guided them to the correct one, which was, I thought, very good. Instead of being discouraging, it was rather allowing them to continue to try to understand the lesson. Anyway, back to 3 of Part A observation. Any noticeable distinction in the students' abilities? As I mentioned with a small group and individualized math instruction, the girl and the 2 boys, they were 2 different kind of lessons. Both were regarding math, but they were on 2 different levels. One was dealing more with whole numbers, and the others was actually diving into fractions. As for students to take action, it's actually really interesting, because there were noticeable distinctions in the groups, but that can actually be a little bit debated, because they were having different topics. The basic lesson was a really great way to analyze problems in society, to break those down into root causes, main issues, and all of the consequences of it. But every single subject was different and engaging, but also the level of which they were talking. Some groups were already way further in, they were able to name off so many different leaves or multiple effects, while others struggled to define whether or not it was a root, a leaf, or both. Sometimes the discussion revealed whether or not the students had done a lot of research, In certain groups, the one that was talking about some form of politics seemed to lack a real understanding of the finer details when it comes to government taxes, because they mostly stayed on a very surface issue. Meanwhile, when it came to ones that were either talking about police brutality or feminism or talking about the eating disorders, all of those were talking about that on multiple different levels, and then we're approaching it from multiple different angles, and I thought that was really exciting to see. All right, back to Part B, interpret observations. For how the teachers engage the students, going back again to small group individualized math instruction, she had different activities set up for the kids. Even the groups, I noticed they had different materials in front of them, they had different papers. I wasn't necessarily able to quite hear what they were talking about. There was a lot going on in the classroom. But generally, from context clues, I would like to say that she had individualized all of them as the video name, which in hindsight is kind of obvious. Anyway, and for when she was doing the one-on-one, she clearly had a different kind of activity for each of them. A lot of the times she would encourage them without necessarily holding them by the hand. When she asked questions to the original girl, most of them were concise and straight on. And then when you had stuff like the boys, it was more her giving them the pieces for them to put it together themselves. I also really loved the narrative interwoven to the beginning of the problem when she was talking about pies, because obviously she was reflecting back to an earlier lesson of some sort where they had involved that, and that's always really good for engagement in my eyes, because having straight up numbers but having a motivation behind those numbers can make them a little more engaging, give you a little bit more motivation to try to solve them. So I really did like that. And when it came to encouraging students to take action, I really liked it when each of them did ask questions to him to elaborate when they were doing the one-on-one groups, as well as how he engaged with their specific topics too, and he would either encourage them to look for more for research, or when it came to the latter part of the lesson where it was talking about how to address chopping down the tree or chopping down the branches or even tackling a root, he, depending on the level of discussion, he would encourage either the action plan or looking more deeply into the research. And also, as for Part B, question 8 of it, did the teacher appear prepared with the lesson taught? Yes, both of these teachers were very much on top of the game and organized. When it came to the small group individualized math instruction, everything from the materials with the popsicles to the whiteboards to, again, everything in that classroom was clearly set up with a great amount of forethought, and it went off with a very well. And even at the end, she was prepared for cleanup with instigating the chant, and altogether, it really, despite the young age, they really did have a great handle on their classroom and was definitely very prepared for that individual time, as well as which students she needed to work on individually and which ones could be in groups and integrating their questions and solving things with their peers. As for preparedness when it came to encouraging students to take action, he definitely was very prepared, because he had the poster paper that the students would use to do the thought diagram or tree models. I noticed after the lecture segment and when a little bit at the start of when the group discussions, he was setting down highlighters for them to write. Um, I actually noticed the walls. The walls of the classroom were filled with similar poster boards. So this is again extrapolating on their behavior. It's that this was a common used and well-oiled tactic where he would lecture, allow them to have their individualized thoughts and conclusions, then have them discussions for the group times where they can now use those individual thoughts and bounce off of each other and have discussion. And then and again, for classroom preparedness, he also even set up the third part when it came to questioning. He had a Google Doc set up, so he had to have done that before. In general, I really his classroom was intriguing. So now to wrap it all up, because I just noticed the time. But also I do need to get going with that part. Describe the management system in the place of the host classroom. Is it effective? Yes, both of these classrooms were very effective. Again, I think I already elaborated enough on the small group one, but when it came to encouraging students to take action, everything from the seating, which originally was set up more like a lecture hall to reflect the fact that he was lecturing, and then when the students moved so that they each had their tables and there was like space between the groups so they had some measure of privacy for them to talk to each other and their ideas. That was really cool. As well as I also noticed on one of the corners he had this little paper that said strongly agree, and this is absolute extrapolation now, I'm aware of this, I apologize, but I feel it's important because having something like that indicates that there was probably one that said strongly agree on the fence or something of that manner, strongly disagree, and then the spectrum of that, probably so that when there was a discussion or debate or something with the topic and they asked for the students' opinions, they could literally walk to where on the wall or where in the room so that people could get a visual of the opinions of their peers in relation to this topic, which is very interesting, and it actually can help him as the instructor probably get a better idea on how to approach it and the dynamics within it. Yeah. And I know this is jumping ahead, and you said not to read that section, and I didn't read the next section. But the lesson he talked about using their individual experiences and strengths, not only just the research, but how did their own perspectives on the issues. And I felt that was brilliant because that definitely increases engagement. That's going to increase a lot of things that I find really intriguing. Okay. I think that's everything. I was not able to type everything, but I managed to get that out somewhat organized. I apologize if this is too long.